Hi everybody, this is SAAD. Back in 2014, I was invited to Wellesley College to deliver a lecture on how the thought police impedes freedom of speech on campuses, etc. And after the lecture, students and professors stayed back to have chats with me. One student in question and I had a long chat where she was discussing the idea that professors should be polling students at the start of class regarding their preferred pronouns. So this was well before the issue gained such center stage in our zeitgeist. And at the time, when we were having a chat, of course, I was resistant to the idea, while of course recognizing that all people should be treated with dignity, but I did not think that it was the optimal way to conduct social interactions by beginning every interaction with polling people regarding their gender pronouns, let alone at the start of a class, let alone what some say should be at start of every class, since one's gender identity and gender expression can change daily. And to make my point, I had asked the student in question whether she thought that we should not be presumptuous in thinking that even at, say, a gynecologist's office, whether the secretary who is interacting with patients as they come in, whether the secretary in question should be polling the patients at a gynecology clinic. And I specifically chose that example because you test these ideas by looking at boundary conditions. That's exactly what you do when you want to test the veracity of a particular position. And then, of course, she was kind of frazzled by my scenario. She said, well, no, that seems like an extreme case. Well, let me read you an email that I just received. Remember, my boundary condition test was whether we should be polling people who come into a gynecologist's office as to their gender identity. And I obtained permission from the person to read this email. Of course, I won't identify who the person is. Dear Dr. Saad, I'm writing to you somewhat frantically, as I feel I must share an experience I had today with someone who will understand. This is more than I'd ever want to tell someone I don't know personally, much less a man, but I must provide you with some background context for the events that unfolded today. I suffer from a condition known as vaginismus. It involves the involuntary contraction of the vaginal muscles and in its most severe forms can make penetration impossible. There are treatments, but they require effort and investment. This condition is rarely discussed, and sufferers often don't even know what the problem is. Instead, they feel shame and embarrassment that they cannot perform sexually. Obviously, many of these scenarios of shame-laden sexual dysfunction concern heterosexual women and their male partners. Incidentally, as a side note, and as I wrote back to the person in question, I'm familiar with this condition, having interacted with someone several years ago who specializes in this particular issue. I like joining support groups on Facebook. I'm a member of several. There's always a bit of absurdity in Facebook support groups, but I was shocked to discover that a vaginismus support group of all groups prohibits participants from using the word women or girls to speak generally about gynecological conditions. Well, it looks like my boundary condition test from 2014 at Wellesley College proved prophetic. One is allowed to self-identify as a woman, but one may make no mention of the fact that women, emphasized, not people, suffer from gynecological and female reproductive disorders. This is to make sure that men with vaginas, men and vaginas, emphasized, italicized, feel included. One woman discussing her terrible endometriosis said, quote, many women have it worse, close quotes. She was instructed to edit her comments and replace it with many people have it worse, so that all of the men with vaginas and non-binary people would feel included in this female reproductive disorder. I have no problem sharing a support group with any other vaginismus sufferers. That's not the issue. The issue is I joined these groups to hear from other women, emphasized, not people. If there are trans men in the group who suffer from vaginismus, I have no problem with it. But I won't pretend that this problem impacts, quote, people, and emphasize people, rather than women emphasized. Or that I have any interest in discussing it with people. I have no interest in pretending that this is not a woman's issue. I decided I would not participate any further in this group. I am part of another women's group not related to vaginismus, which actually advertises itself as, quote, only women, close quote. I wrote there that I could not believe that women were censored like this, that I felt erased and language policed, and that I could not stand seeing the word, quote, women stigmatized like a racial slur as somehow offensive. The idea that using the word women to talk generally about gynecological problems would be offensive is baffling. I did prophesize this exact reality back at Wellesley College in 2014, and offensive to me. I don't agree that it's offensive. Trans/non-binary people, or trans/non-binary, chose to leave the category of women. I chose to stay. It's not my fault that biology is what it is and that they retain elements of female anatomy. Is it too much to ask that they respect my need to not decouple these two things? That they can do the work of towing two worlds and suspending their belief as they tread these binaries rather than asking me to pretend otherwise? These women, for the most part, began to call me a transphobe and a TERF, trans-exclusionary radical feminist, despite the fact that I repeatedly said that I had no problem with bathrooms, pronouns, shared spaces, and all of it. I just won't discuss female reproductive or gynecological disorders with sex-neutral descriptors such as, quote, people. I then asked why the opinions and feelings of women and their feelings of marginalization when talking about the female body with sex-neutral language were irrelevant, but the feelings of, quote, men with vaginas, close quote, were so paramount. Of course, no one answered. Instead, it was all about how terrible trans and non-binary folks have it and how we must be inclusive. Of course, there are issues related to access to healthcare for trans people, but am I really being made to believe that decoupling the relationship between women and vaginismus will somehow solve this problem? If I just say, quote, pregnant people, suddenly trans pregnancy will be smooth sailing? Do I have to erase the fact that I belong to a group, women, for others to gain rights or access to healthcare? Women broadly were never consulted about this. We never agreed to talk about our bodies, our reproductive organs, or our sex lives in sex-neutral terms, either as individuals or a collective. No one asked women, or vagina havers, as we are now called, if we were okay with changing, quote, pregnant women to, quote, pregnant people. Despite the super woke dumpster fire I traversed into today, I don't believe most of us are best. Of course, I won't share the name. This is the reality when you have tyranny of the majority. Trans people exist. Trans people have the same right to live lives full of bigotry, but in the pursuits of them instantiating their rights, the same rights that are afforded to every other person in a free society, that doesn't mean we trample on the right of the majority. That doesn't mean that we suspend common sense, science, logic, reason in order to celebrate your unique personhood. This person is someone who suffers from a very debilitating gynecological problem, and she has to write to me in despair because she is basically run out of town. She suddenly becomes a Nazi because she's confused that a group that is supposed to discuss gynecological issues is tarring and feathering her. Is this really what we want in a society that is rooted in logic, in science, in reason, in true classical liberalism? These are the messages that I receive every single day from people from around the world. For better or worse, I have become the central repository to people who are simply trying to find a way to be rescued from the abyss of infinite lunacy. Shame on those who participate in attacking people when they are at their lowest. This person is suffering from a truly serious, not only physiological condition, but a psychological one, right? The idea that it is difficult, if not impossible, to have sex is not a pleasant reality. And yet when she goes to join a group to gain support, she's run out of town. If you don't participate in fighting against idea pathogens, you are complicit in their spread. Have a good day, everybody.